We are live on the YouTube.
All righty, welcome back, everybody. It's Wednesday, April 2nd, and you are joining the House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee. We are working on a solar bill that came over from the Senate, S50. And as we continue to think about the path forward for that bill, we're going to hear today from Renewable Energy Vermont about one particular section of the bill that might be relevant. Yeah.
S50 or H394?
So we are hearing today about a particular section of H394 that might be relevant. Sorry, I missed the memo. I missed the link there. That could be relevant to S50. So I'm Kathleen James from Manchester.
Scott Campbell, St. Johnsbury.
Richard Bailey, Lamoille 2.
Tomorrow, Wyndham, Windsor, Michael Southport, Caledonia 2. Thanks for Howland, Rutland 4.
Garrett Torrey, Washington 2.
Graham Pupner to June 13, Burlington.
Lawrenceville.
I'm Jonathan Downs. I work with Peter at Renewable Energy Vermont.
Great.
Jack Locker, Committee Assistant.
Jones McKee, for James.
All right. Okay, for the record.
Great. Peter Sterling, Director of Renewable Energy Vermont. Thank you so much for taking some time to hear from me about this today. Love to talk about how we can more efficiently use land that's already hosting solar or is suitable for solar, and legislative change to help facilitate that. So on the first slide, section 8002 in 30 VSA defines a plant. You can see the definition there. That last sentence, common ownership, continuing time of construction for proximity of facilities to each other shall be relevant to determining whether a group of facilities is part of the same project. So that is the area of concern that I think that many of us believe has stopped solar from being sited on places that are very suitable. And we can talk, the rest of my presentation will be talking about why that's happening.
Peter, right. Sorry, just to start with the first couple of sentences. So
sure.
A plant is, we're seeing it's something that generates generates electricity from renewable energy.
Right.
Okay. And if there's a group of something, they're considered a plant if it's part of the same project. And then what you're drawing to our attention is the red sentence.
That's right. This is the direction the General Assembly has given the Public Utility Commission. So throughout my testimony here, I don't want to imply that the PUC is overreaching. This is the legislative direction the PUC has had, and I think it's time to change that statute. That direction we're giving the PUC to allow for more solar to be built on sites that are already hosting solar or are very suitable for solar. So this single plant language was put into statute in 2009 to ensure that larger solar projects were not artificially partitioned to be eligible for the non-market prices in the original standard offer. Solar developers now have to address this single plant constraint for other non-standard offer projects as well. And I'll go into that with examples later in my presentation. But here's the reason we can make this change now that we have not been able, in prior years, it's not been appropriate. With the end of off-site net metering in last year's renewable energy standard, and with standard offer also not moving forward, being over, the single plant statute just adds time, cost, and uncertainty to the process of deploying solar in Vermont without any other benefit to ratepayers. Originally, the single plant legislation was put in place to theoretically protect ratepayers from anyone trying to game the system by splitting a project up to make it more profitable. Because we don't have any more procurement programs with non-market rates like offsite net metering and standard offer, there is no rate need, there is no rate built threat to ratepayers. So we can go into some of the examples of the rest of my presentation. So when standard offer prices were set administratively, meaning by the PUC, there was a clear conceptual justification for this language. Before 2013, standard offer prices were set by the legislature and then the PUC, which was then called the Public Service Board. And so if you look at that picture on the left, a 5 megawatt plant is an eligible standard offer. Cost savings accrue to ratepayers when you build at this scale. So let's say 5 megawatt plant is roughly 35 acres, right? But if someone were under the original standard offer, were to chop that 5 megawatt plant into 2.2 megawatt plants, which is the limit of standard offer, they would have, in theory, gotten a higher market price. And the piece, and you can see that Supreme Court ruling at the bottom was to prevent that. So standard offer's limit is 2.2 megawatts. And originally the prices were set at above market rates to help spur the deployment of solar back in 2009, 2010. And the PUC wanted to make sure that no one was splitting up a larger project, which would also benefit ratepayers, into two smaller ones to make an outsized profit. So that was the justification for the single plant language. Now let's get into how this is playing out in the development world, in the real world. So on the right there, you can see there's a 2.3 megawatt solar array on an old gravel pit. Just to the north of it, there's more land from that gravel pit area, but that would be potentially off limits to any new solar array because of single plant constraints, meaning the developer may have to build a new road, which would cost many, many thousands of dollars, even though there's a perfectly good road right there. So Vermont's single plant law can prevent solar projects from being built one another, from taking maximum advantage of sites that are already disturbed locations like brownfields, already host solar, like in this example, that are close to existing load, which is beneficial. And here's a really important one. Because towns have responded to the state's enhanced energy planning requirements in Act 179, they have clustered solar development in their land use planning. Single plant now runs counter to a town's ability to manage solar development. That's a lot.
Yes, so what is the limit now on attaching, in this example, another solar field to the solar field?
So
There was a 2.2 megawatt limit on standard offer. But we don't have standard offer and we don't, and we don't need
But now, correct.
It's a limit now.
Correct. There's no limit, but because this law is on the books, there is this 2.2 megawatt here that potentially was part of standard offer. Under the law, the PUC could rule that this standard offer plant there was a certain rate and certain expenses were built into that rate, like this road, which ratepayers already paid for under standard offer. This new project should not be allowed to use that road. Because
if I can interrupt, so
Sorry.
The 2.2 limit applies to the existing one in the south box. So you can't add to that because it will be billed at the same rate as standard offer.
Well, first, the limit for what we're talking about is tier 2 solar. I should have explained that. All the in-state stuff we're trying to build to meet our tier 2 requirement, the limit on that is 5 megawatts. So none of the projects we are talking about can exceed 5 megawatts first as a start.
Okay, so there is a limit.
There is a limit to, distributed generation is generally limited at 5 megawatts of solar.
No single plant can be larger than 5 megawatts.
Correct. To qualify for tier 2, yes, that's right. Which is what we're talking about. You can build like a 20 megawatt solar, it's just not tier 2, but just what we're talking about today, the limit is 5 megawatts. I'm trying to be clear.
In this particular example, if this is a standard offer project, right, in the green box, then adding on to that with another 2 megawatt array. The problem with that is that the standard offer contract, it goes for a certain number of years, right? And you can't add more. That's right, more generation to that, right? Okay, so that's another approach, right? But that wouldn't be addressed by this. But you could build a single plant.
But what you could build in the red box to the north is a non-standard offer project up to 5 megawatts. If we eliminated the single plant ruling, it would be a lot easier to build in that red box up to 5 megawatts.
And we just have to be building a different.
It would be exactly not through the standard offer program, through a PPA arrangement with the utility.
And that's capable. That can be done.
Oh yeah, that's how it's going to be done, because that's the only way we can build solar now in Vermont, which is fine.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is, as long as the single plant ruling is on the books, there are constraints to even doing that PPA up there. If you, for example, want to use the existing road, the PUC might not let you do that because they have to follow the guide, that language that was in the red on the second slide about common infrastructure. And I'll show you on the next slide some examples. If it's a different.
And I'm sorry to be elaborating, but I'm just trying to understand. If it's built at a different rate, then wouldn't it be a different project?
It is a different project, but the PUC, because of this statute, when they evaluate that different project, and let's say that developer says, I'm going to use the original road because I don't want to build another $70,000 road. I'm going to use that original road that helps me access this area. The PUC under single plan can say, well, you're using infrastructure from another project that was part of a non-market rate. We're going to make you build a new road. So they wouldn't, the PUC is not going to say you can't build up there. They're going to say you just have to add a lot of cost and time and expense by building a new road because you cannot share common infrastructure with a program that had an above market rate. Like a whole, like they might. So it's not, they're saying you cannot do it. They're just saying you have to do all these other steps. And when I go through my examples, you'll see some of those steps. Yeah.
Rep. Howard?
So the two potential problems here. This picture you show on this slide, you don't show a boundary line. They could be the same parcel, the same old gravel pit was owned. Or you had they can't use the same infrastructure. They can't share infrastructure, even if the two parcels are separately owned. If there's a property line in between these two fields, these two boxes.
Well, in this example, it is actually the same parcel.
Right. So obviously the parcel definition was there and what I was called senior to it. Okay, I got it.
Okay.
Yeah, nice.
Rep. Southworth?
So is one of the intents of this to avoid further permitting and planning costs?
Yeah. Well, it's to mitigate, it's to lessen some of it's not the permitting process is the same. It's the requirements for the CPG that would be lessened. Like, as you'll see in my next example, you don't have to build additional roads. If the road that accesses the green box could help you get to the red box, you could use that road as part of your application process. You don't have to build a road right next to it. You'll see my next example, to avoid using common infrastructure, a solar developer 2 years had built a solar array, then 2 years later wanted to expand it and make it and put a different solar up there. They had to take down the poles they put up brand new poles to avoid using common infrastructure. It's just extra expense.
So Peter, is it accurate to say that a statute that made sense in the context of standard offer, now that standard offer is no longer, is constraining people or making it more expensive to try to permit additional solar on under the tier 2 less than 5 megawatt thing?
That's it. I don't really need to go on the rest of my testimony.
No, I think we need to go on. I just, it's
that's actually
always
the whole
good
thing
to
right there as well.
start at the beginning, so.
And I would also add one of the ways this also played out was once offsite net metering evolved, and let's say you had a site for a 1 megawatt solar field, like 6 acres, you could potentially divide that up into 500 kilowatt, the maximum net metering, potentially gain the system that way. It didn't usually work out, but so with the end of offsite net metering and standard offer, there's really no justification to protect ratepayers for this. So it's more than just standard offer going away, it's offsite net metering going away as well. It's
Yeah.
So aren't you a proponent of continuing the standard offer? Wasn't that a bill that was introduced and you're a proponent of that? So I'm confused as to why you're conflicting against that.
I just don't see that standard offer becoming law anytime in the next half a dozen years. And if it were to become law, you would be able to write in single family protections on that, saying standard offer could not be co-located and things like
Yeah,
that.
I'm just confused on why we're doing two different things. That's all. I'm good. Thank you.
Well, we're not doing two different. Well, let me just say it like this: right now, what is happening is the single plant restriction is being applied to non-standard offer projects.
Right, I understand that.
So what I'm really trying to say is for projects that don't have non-market rates like PPAs, this single plant is restricting us from building in good spots. This has, if standard offer were to come back because the General Assembly really wanted it, we would have to write in restrictions on where standard offer could be cited to prevent developers from doing what I just said, which would be, co-locating and taking advantage of not market prices. So I don't really think it's in conflict at all. What I'm trying to do is make it easier to build PPAs basically, have PPAs in places that are suitable for solar, which is different than the standard offer program.
I'm good.
Okay, say we'll go, I think we'll go 1, 2, 3. I think that was the order.
So the limitations are the use of common infrastructure is putting such a high cost on the proposed site that it makes it I don't know if it's uneconomical to be
Exactly
viable.
right. That's exactly right.
All right, thank you.
So in doing this, if we were to move forward with doing this, and there are any inadequacies on the grid, how would that get addressed?
Well, that would be done through the CPG process. I mean, anytime a
Right.
developer
Yeah.
wants to bring solar on, and they have to go through an interconnection process with the utility. The utility then can say, well, this is how much it's going to cost to interconnect it. So there's efficiency in that substation. Developer, it may cost you 100,000, it may cost you $1 million, and the developer can decide if they can build it. So it's always up to, at the end of the day, it's always up to the utility about whether it's going to be interconnected or not.
And the PUC,
Well, then the PUC can decide whether to grant a CPG. I mean, I don't really believe that the PUC overrules utilities. If the utility says this is how much it's going to cost to interconnect, the PUC does not go into that level of detail. It's up to the developer to decide whether they can interconnect this at the price that the utility says it costs.
and do you ever get shut down to develop, not you, but any of your members ever get shut down from building because of interconnection issues?
Yeah.
So you answered Rep. Southworth's question, which could be phrased as, if the standard offer comes back, is this going to screw things up? And give an answer as to how you would manage that.
If standard offer was to come back, it can only come back with single plant protections written in.
Yeah, and
Otherwise ratepayers might be disadvantaged.
my question is analogous relative to offsite net metering, which if that comes back and as community solar, is this going to screw anything up if we get rid of this single plant?
Correct, yes. If there's any program, whether it's standard offer, offset metering, community solar, any program that sets a non-market rate, there would have to be some single plant protections written into it. So no one is trying to game the system. That I think is a reasonable thing to do.
So in terms of balls in the air, we've got standard offer, which is ended, and our committee and the Senate, offsite, not working right now on standard offer, but we are talking about community solar.
Yeah.
So, if we build into S50 some sort of community solar program, some sort of successor program there, we are going to need to make sure that we're synced up with this. And if we aren't able to get that done and that waits till next year or sometime in the future, this little discrete piece could go into S50
Right.
on its own,
And just as
if nothing else is happening.
just as a finer line of detail, you can have a community solar program that is through market rates, because it's, in which case the single plant system would not apply. It's only if the legislature or the PUC sets a different rate than the market would there be gaming on the system. What was in S57 in the Senate was a community solar program through the standard offer program, but and that would have had to have included, because that standard offer is potentially a non-market rate, you would have had to include some protection if we move forward on this.
Gotcha.
I can just restate this to make sure I'm clear in my head.
Yeah.
What we are saying, what you're saying is that there are protections and restrictions that are needed and appropriate for above market rate projects, which are now being applied to all projects above market rate and market rate. And they are providing no benefit on the market rate projects and providing a detriment in restricting good sites from bidding.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Thank you.
So I can just give some examples on how those restrictions are playing out in the real world. If you go to the next slide. On a site designated by the town of Bennington as a preferred site, MHD Solar was advised by its attorneys to conclusively demonstrate that their solar project shared no common infrastructure with the 500 kilowatt net meter project in the same parcel installed by MHD 5 years before. So you can see the red road and the blue road there to ensure they didn't run into this single plant issue. Again, this is before the PUC had even ruled. Just their lawyers are saying this is what you're going to bump into based on previous PUC rulings. You need to build a brand new road into this parcel at a cost of over $50,000. So again, the PUC did not come back and say this is a single plant, but you don't want to hit that right in the middle of your CPG process. It would delay everything. So they just went ahead and did it and built it into the cost of the project ahead of time, just to avoid any potential single plant issues. Another solar developer was advised by their lawyers to replace perfectly good utility poles it had installed only 2 years earlier on the site that they were building on that had a previous solar bank. So perfectly good poles, they pulled them out. They put on other new poles in the same spot, but as long as it wasn't common infrastructure, it was not going to trigger the PUC's single plant declaration. Two more examples. On the next slide, a residential developer working with a solar developer designed 4 individualized solar and battery storage systems for 4 new residential units on 2 separate parcels. You can see the map to the right. Each unit was metered separately and does not share any infrastructure or interconnection points. So if most people would say that means they are independent, they are not sharing anything. However, the PUC initially stated that all 4 projects should be considered a single plant, which initiated an unexpected 8-month review process. And you can see on that map, the 2 closest arrays to each other were 300 feet away on separate parcels with separate owners. They just happened to be built at the same time by the same solar developer in a condo development. So they ended up getting built, but it took another 8 months, and there was no benefit to ratepayers in that 8-month delay. Last one is up at Global Foundries, who is doing a lot of great work to put solar on their already developed campus. Solar developers need to petition the PUC on single plant issues before moving forward with building multiple tier 2 projects on Global Foundries 400-acre industrial campus. The single plant statute required extra hurdles, adding tens of thousands of dollars in cost and several months of delay before a favorable ruling was achieved from the PUC, allowing the process to move forward. And you can see, where these sites are located, they don't really look like they're contiguous. They're in very different parts of the Global Foundry campus. Okay, so my last slide.
But Global Foundries is a utility, correct? So that, in my mind, would have some bearing on how that was looked at. Correct.
Now it is a CPG process, whether it's utility owned or owned by a developer, it's still the same process in section 248.
Thank you.
Okay, my last slide. Again, the goal of the proposed revisions is to ensure that renewable energy projects that are physically close to one another do not have to rebut a presumption that they are a single plant. This rebuttal process leads to an unpredictable regulatory review process, unexpected delays resulting in increased costs, and the underutilization of sites that already host solar. So you can see our greatly simplified language that we think to what's in H394. This is what we hope could be added to S50. Again, I'll just end by saying, with the end of off-site metering as standard offer, there's no longer any justification for this existing single plant definition. And I believe that this is something that we should be able to find consensus on this language with the distributed utilities and regulators. I think that should all be able to come together and find consensus language to allow sites that are, again, not part of a procurement program with above market rates to not be subject to the presumption of single plant.
So can you talk a little bit more about the tier 2 5 megawatt limit and how this would interact with that?
Okay, that's great. That's a great question. So ISO New England has given their direction to states that they consider anything under 5 megawatts to be distributed generation. It's not in statute. It's how ISO does things in practice. So we all abide by that throughout the rules. So what we were saying is, because this law is intended to facilitate distributed generation, help meet tier 2 requirements, we're trying to help projects under 5 megawatts get built in appropriate locations, which is why we put in that, we're recommending in that first sentence that there can be no more than 10 megawatts co-located. Because if you start having more than 10 megawatts in close proximity, you're getting away from the whole distributed generation benefits of, renewable energy being located all over the place. It's starting to be pushed too much in one spot that it would look like you're going around something to ISO, and that's just not what we need to do. So that's why we're keeping the limit on an adjacent site or on the same parcel to 10 megawatts. 5 megawatts can be located. Anything more, and you're probably running afoul of the intent of ISO's limit on distributed generation. Clear as mud?
No, yes. So ISO has a limit in what they're defining as distributed generation of 5 megawatts.
Right.
Why would they say, okay, two 5 megawatt plants is okay next to each other?
Well, ISO wouldn't really make the ruling. It's really what the utilities, I think, would feel is appropriate for not maxing out, a substation. And
so would it still qualify as tier 2?
yeah, as long as they're independent plants and you can connect them independently, they would still all qualify. But we want to make sure that, let's say there's a 200-acre site, you're not trying to put a lot of distributed generation on it, because it would really probably want to follow the intent of tier 2, which is, again, distributed generation, meaning power located in different parts of the grid, not just located in one spot like McNeil or Vermont Yankee was.
So in effect, this is, doing away with the single plant definition. It's just raising it to 10 megawatts with separate interconnections.
Well, no, it's changing the definition in that you wouldn't have to demonstrate the PUC that you're using separate interconnections and separate equipment and things like that. This statutory change, but it would limit anything that's on a co-located site or the same site to having not more than 10 megawatts of cumulative capacity. That's our recommendation. You can bring other experts in, they may not think it's necessary.
But it's still a limit of 10 megawatts.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't say that each interconnection should be a maximum of 5 megawatts. But it seems like maybe in order to qualify as tier 2 distributed generation.
But we have in statute that tier 2, the limit on tier 2 is 5 megawatts.
Right. Okay.
And that's based on ISO's guidance.
But anyway, we're not doing away with the single plant definition. We're just raising 10 megawatts in effect.
In a sense, yes.
Okay. Just trying to.
Yeah, no, sorry about my circuitous way of getting to that. I'm trying to give you the details.
Okay. Oh, yeah, okay.
So back on this other, seeing that this simplifies it or not, and Rep Howland might be able to help me out on this. Would the utility line extension process be easier? So that we don't have to go in and build a new road? That, if I understand how the utility line extension goes, if it goes beyond it, then the new customer pays prorated share of the chunk that's already there.
Yes, but in this particular example that he has, or he used the example that they pulled out totally poles that were only 2 years old. The thought went in my mind that somebody built a line to capacity. And just give it a number 2 line. Somebody else comes along and wants to build something else, and they have to build a bigger line. So with that bigger line, you get bigger weight. When you get bigger weight, maybe the pole spacing, and nobody wants to pay for any more than they need.
Right.
And so that could have been part of the process, but he said he pulled out 2-year-old, would have to or did pull out 2-year-old poles. He didn't address that it might have been a conductor upgrade, whatever, or some sort of other controls, because as the amount of energy that goes through any particular point has to be able to be controlled. And the control mechanisms vary with the quantity. So there's other issues that people.
Well, I'm just thinking not having to build a second row.
But
I
that's
could just go on to that.
Yes, but as far as a line extension to a property home, if somebody builds it and somebody comes off the end and you haven't been, and so many, you get a prorated time and distance.
Peter?
Representative Howland, I spoke directly to the developer who has this 2-pole example, and they were very clear. The only reason they pulled those poles out of the ground was because their lawyer told them they had to rebut ahead of time the presumption that it could be a single plane head. The gauge of the line was not germane. It was just to rebut the presumption of single plane before they got halfway through the CPG process and then potentially, had a whole go belly out. But to your point, Representative, you under this with single plant, simply extending a line from a project that has an above or non-market rate would be sharing. And that, if you look at that first sentence, it would be common ownership, contiguous infrastructure, proximity to facilities, and other factors that are related to the original project. So you couldn't just extend a line. That would actually be the definition of single plant. And that's what we're trying to allow them to developer to do, is use that common infrastructure from the original facility to build the adjacent facility more cheaply and quickly.
Dylan, do you have a for the record?
Yeah, sure. For the record, Dylan's looking at Lee and I'm from GMP to represent Bailey's question. I think so. The line extension tariff that each utility has that's approved by the Public Utility Commission really has to do with extending a line to a customer premise. So it's on the usage side as opposed to an interconnection, which is when you have a generation facility and it's interconnecting the grid. So it wouldn't necessarily fall under the line extension tariff. It's a separate process.
Thank you. All right, we have, Rep. Kleckner, yeah.
Heard Charlie Munger's advice never to take a position on an issue until you can argue the opposite side better than the proponents of that side themselves. What's the strongest argument against doing what you're proposing?
That at some point in the future, if the legislature decides to create a community solar program with a non-market rate, that a developer conceivably could come in and divide up a larger project to fit into that smaller project with the above market rate and then make excess profit. And the legislature would then choose not to act to prevent that.
The potential worst consequence that we have to remember to do that if there's an above market rate program.
That is correct. That's the only consequence that I can see from this.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for coming, Peter.
So standard offer and group net metering can be combined as both being in above standard rate, above market rate project.
Well, the original standard offer was when the rates were administratively set. I don't think once it went to reverse auction, there's any evidence that standard offer projects cost more than the PPAs. But the original standard offer, which is administratively set, was definitely above market rate, and net meter, as we all know, is an above market rate.
So the only thing that's left is EPAs or agreement
Right now.
that can be developed outside. And there's no negative bidding. No. Reverse bidding.
Nothing like that exists anymore.
Okay, we've got a witness waiting online. Peter, thank you so much.
So when you go.
And we'll return to this, but we've got someone joining us from Oregon and I want to be respectful of this time. So, great. Sean, thank you so much for joining us. We're already live on YouTube, so we'll go around the room and quickly introduce ourselves so that you know who we are. And then we'll turn it over to you and you can introduce yourself for the record and present your testimony, which I'm sure is going to be really interesting. We learned a lot just this morning about how Vermont funds state IT. So I'm Representative Kathleen James. I'm from the Bennington 4 district.
I'm Scott Campbell. I'm from St. John Prairie, which is the 1008 Essex district. And thank you for joining us as the crack was on for you.
Richard Bailey, Lamoille 2.
Chris Morrow, Wyndham, Windsor, Bennington District. Michael Southworth, Caledonia 2.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Dara Torrey, Washington 2.
Graham Kleppner, Burlington, perhaps for Vermont, one of the most urban districts in the state, but it is Vermont, so urban's a very relative term.
Laura Sibilia.
Jack Locker, committee assistant.
Lisa Gott, an IT consultant with JFO.
All right. For the record, you come highly recommended. So thank you for joining us.
Well, Chair James, Vice Chair Campbell, Ranking Member Sibilia, and members of the committee, it's a real pleasure to be with you. In the interest of time, if at the chair's discretion, I'll go ahead and share my presentation and we'll get started.
Sounds great.
Okay. Can you all see the presentation?
Yes.
Great. Let me go ahead and launch that. All right. So again, committee, it's great to be with you this morning. For the record, my name is Sean McSpaden. I serve as a principal legislative IT analyst and also as a committee administrator for Oregon's Joint Legislative Committee on Information Management and Technology. Just a quick background, this is my 27th year in Oregon state government. The first 15 of those years I spent in the executive branch in a variety of different roles in the office of the state chief information officer, including a 5.5-year stint as Oregon's deputy state chief information officer. Throughout that tenure, worked with the agencies, with the legislature, with our chief financial office on IT planning, IT budgeting, and IT program and project oversight. About 12 years ago, I transitioned over to the Oregon Legislative Fiscal Office, again, serving as a principal legislative IT analyst and as a committee administrator for both Information Management Technology Committee and for our Transparency Oregon Advisory Commission. Lastly, I serve as Oregon's representative to the National Conference of State Legislatures Task Force on Cybersecurity, Artificial Intelligence, and Privacy. So again, great to be with you all and really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about the Oregon story, how we're organized, and a variety of other topics relevant to your discussion on how IT is funded in the state of Vermont. Again, this is the table of contents of the slide deck. I did include some more detailed information that I won't go into in any level of detail. I wanted to make sure you all had as much information as I could provide as a leave behind. Certainly some of the material you may want to review at late night to help with your sleeping, or certainly when you've had a couple of cups of coffee so that you can stay focused. Some of this information, as you know, is quite dry, but quite important to the funding of digital infrastructure, as you call it. I love that term because it is the foundation of government operations. So a little bit about the Oregon Legislative Fiscal Office. Much like your joint fiscal office there in Vermont, we operate in a nonpartisan manner. The Legislative Fiscal Office provides a variety of services, primarily to the Joint Committee on Ways and Means, focused in on reviewing the governor's budget, working with agencies on their requests for the new year, on assessing how they've spent money the legislature has appropriated in the past, and of course, hidden in these words is is the topic of information technology. Certainly more and more part of state government operations, and the systems that our IT professionals maintain are critical to service delivery to our constituents. The Legislative Fiscal Office does provide, as I mentioned, primary support to our Joint Committee on Ways and Means, but also provides the same kinds of services to a variety of other committees and boards within the Oregon Legislature. Primarily today, I'll focus in on the Joint Legislative Committee on Information Management and Technology. We do have a variety of task forces that I'll just mention. Recently, we had a task force on artificial intelligence. Again, we have a task force related to transparency. That's the Transparency Commission on the left side of the screen. We certainly, from a special committee perspective, from time to time, the legislature will appoint members to focus in on a particular topic. In years past, we had some task force organizations formed around geospatial data sharing across public bodies in Oregon, ensuring that we had great collaboration, better collaboration between our state and our local governments. We've also had a variety of focus efforts on public safety wireless communications, again, a multi-jurisdictional issue. But again, I'll focus on the Joint Legislative Committee on Information Management Technology from here on out. The JLCIMT, which is our acronym, it's a mouthful, but certainly is the acronym of our committee. It is a statutory committee. It was established in probably the early to mid 90s. It has taken various forms over the years, but at its essence, the Joint Committee on Information Management Technology was formed to work with the executive branch to establish statewide IT goals and policy, to provide recommendations and feedback on the state's IT strategy, certainly to serve as a support organization for the Joint Committee on Ways and Means in regards to IT project and cybersecurity oversight. And again, we have a variety of other roles that allow the committee to do research, assessments, studies, work with the executive branch to gather information on a variety of different topics. And also the Information Management Technology Committee serves as a policy committee focused on information technology, cybersecurity, and now artificial intelligence related topics.
Oh, looks like you're about to get there. So I had a question about how it actually works and how it compares to some things we do, but it looks like it might be on your next slide.
Okay. The Information Management Technology Committee, it's a 6-member committee, 3 members of the Senate, 3 members of the House. The current House co-chair, Representative Nathanson, she's been the co-chair of this committee the entire time I've been here in the legislature. I've appreciated working with her. Senator Woods has been the co-chair since the 2023 legislative session, but a very engaged committee, and certainly we do meet both during the legislative sessions. Oregon is a biennial budget state, and so we have a long session in the odd numbered year, and we have a short session, about 45 days, in the even numbered years. And we also have a roughly quarterly, doesn't always work out that way, but we have some what we call legislative days, where either the interim joint committee on Ways and Means or the emergency board meets for a few days during those quarterly get-togethers, and the Information Management and Technology Committee and task forces also meet during those days. During the 2025 legislative session, we meet once per week on Fridays. Again, I've provided some links here to the authorizing statute and also to the website that we have for the committee that lists all of our committee meetings, the recordings of the meetings, all the materials, the recording logs. So a great deal of information for the current session, but also the ability on our Oregon Legislative Information System to search back some 20 plus years on content that has been brought before the committee.
Mr. McSpadden, is this there aren't then separate, standalone, related or overlapping committees in the House and the Senate, right? This is it. There's one single joint committee and they do the work.
Yes, was that Chair James that asked the question?
Yeah, sorry about that.
No worries. I've got a small screen here, so thank you very much. Yes, a great question. In the Oregon legislature, it's the primary committee, and it's the only one that has technology in the name. So I'm hedging here a little bit.
Okay.
From time to time, we do see, as an example, broadband related bills that emanate through our House and Senate committees on economic development, as an example. We do see artificial intelligence legislation, of course, in a variety of different substantive House and Senate committees, whether it be Health and Human Services or our consumer protection committees, our Judiciary Committee on privacy, data security and privacy. So some of the topics that you think, boy, that sounds like information technology. Of course, we do have that programmatic view, that policy view of these issues as well. And people in the other substantive policy committees do recognize the importance of technology to achieving those policy goals around privacy, around economic development, et cetera. And so some of the topics will emanate in those committees as well.
Thanks.
You bet. So this session, just wanted to highlight a couple of bills that I thought would be relevant to the work of your committee, and certainly allows me to, now that I know you're working on it, certainly follow along with your progress on information technology funding, the potential creation or bolstering of your technology modernization funding. But we have a couple of bills. One, House Bill 3230, it has worked its way through our committee. It is now in our Joint Committee on Ways and Means, and that in a nutshell, that particular bill calls for the State Chief Information Officer to conduct an independent assessment of how IT in the executive branch in Oregon is organized, how it's governed, how it's operating. I'll get to in a few moments how IT in Oregon is organized, but we're a decentralized state. We're at the other end of the pendulum from Vermont. And so it's been about a decade or more since the last substantive assessment of IT in Oregon has taken place. And so our committee feels strongly that now's the time to do it again, in particular in relationship to this issue of long-term funding. I did get a chance to listen in to your joint fiscal office presentation. I also had a chance to read the brief that they produced for you. And I thought it was excellent. It hit on the same kinds of issues that we're dealing with here in Oregon. Again, interesting, regardless of structure, we're dealing with the same kinds of issues about, how do we fund IT operationally, regardless of how we're organized, but more importantly, how do we carve out more and more money, more and more of a percentage of our overall IT budget for innovation and for modernization. And so that's that Senate Bill 1090 that the committee is considering actually this Friday. And so this is a very timely conversation for us. Just very quickly, I won't go into this list, but wanted to give you an idea of the other topics that our Joint Committee on Information Management Technology is focused on. Again, both in support of our Joint Committee on Ways and Means, but also just through member interest, and also through past what we call budget notes that have been attached to agency budget bills on specific projects. We do require quite often agencies to come back to our committee to report on the progress of their major IT projects. So again, I won't hit on all the detail here, but in a nutshell, this is how Oregon is organized from an information technology perspective. I tried to include all three branches, our constitutional offices here in this single graphic. But again, as I mentioned, we're a decentralized state to slightly federated. And I say that because we have a state sales office, we have enterprise information technology services that are provided by the state CIO organization, a data center, cybersecurity, our network, and a variety of other services. Our state's e-government web portal and some other services. But predominantly the staff, the money, and the responsibility for implementing projects and for maintaining information systems, it rests with our executive branch IT agencies. We do have this separation as well among the branches. And so although there is some limited use of enterprise services, enterprise applications by our legislative branch, our judicial branch, and our constitutional offices, which are composed of our Secretary of State and our Treasurer, for the most part, they operate independently. They're not subject to the state CIO's authority. They're not compelled to utilize the state CIO services. And so from an oversight perspective, then it falls to our office to oversee their activities, their operations, and their projects. On the left side of the screen, I try to provide some high-level metrics. I do have some more detailed slides in the deck for you about the scope and scale of the IT workforce in the executive branch. Oregon, as I said, very decentralized. We have, as far as we can tell, 2,344 IT classified positions spread across 50 state agency boards and commissions. Important, again, to show this minority position, I'll call it, for the state CIO's office. Only 254 of those IT classified positions are under direct state CIO supervision, just short of 11% of the overall staff count. Again, to give you some comparison metrics, Oregon's executive branch has about 47,000, between 47,000 and 48,000 executive branch positions. And that leaves us with an IT support ratio, IT staff to overall employees of about 1 to 20. And, you know, as your committee and other committees in the Vermont legislature begin to really dive into the numbers here, consolidated states, centralized states typically have a ratio in the 1 to 30, 1 to 35. And what that means is that fewer IT staff can support more state employees. And so Oregon is in the reverse situation where, because we're decentralized, both from an IT perspective and an organizational perspective, we do have seemingly redundant and duplicative IT staffs, again, spread across multiple agencies within the executive branch. From a spending perspective, again, I do have some more detailed slides, but wanted to give you an overall kind of macro perspective. Oregon, as far as we can tell, spends about $2.3 billion on information technology in a variety of different categories on a biennial basis, as compared to $127.7 billion all funds biennial budget. So from a percentage perspective, we estimate that Oregon spends about 1.8% of our overall budget on information technology. It's a pretty low percentage, but probably is comparable to many states across the nation. I think this is something that likely Doug Robinson, the executive director of the National Association of State CIOs, who you have over on today, certainly could provide some comparisons across the states. I think this likely aligns with many of the states that are members of his organization. The last thing I'd mention on this slide is that although we spend about $2.3 billion on IT every biennium, certainly in the last biennium, we estimate about 75 to 80% of that spend is focused in on legacy systems, operations, and maintenance. So that means we're spending the vast majority of our money maintaining old systems, old processes, automating old operations. It leaves limited funding and focus, frankly, from our agencies on IT innovation and modernization. And I know that's the focus of your hearing today. Certainly the Joint Fiscal Office brief that you saw earlier about, how do we create a fund and sustain it over time for modernization? That's a challenge we face as well. I won't talk about this slide at all, but again, wanted dive down one level into our largest branch in Oregon state government and give you a feel for how things are divided between the IO, between the Department of Administrative Services Director, who also serves as a Chief Operating Officer, and our agency boards and commissions. Importantly, IT procurement, I will mention this, IT procurement is not a function that the state CIO is directly in control of. The state CIO, the agencies work with our Department of Administrative Services State Procurement Office for statewide IT procurement, access to large contracts, state agreements for hardware, software, and services that are available to all agencies and our local governments. But then the agencies themselves, in addition to having these smaller information technology operations, they also have delegated procurement authority for information technology. So that does create a complicated situation for coordinated procurement, for standardization, for normalization of the IT infrastructure over time when there's so many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak. I think I hit on all these metrics just narratively. This gives you kind of a by the numbers view of the executive branch IT workforce. I decided to focus in and give you a little more detail of our largest agencies. So from the top 12, as I mentioned, we have about 2,344 IT classified staff. We do have an aggregation of those positions in just a few agencies. And it also calls out that far right category. I wanted to highlight this variability between the number of IT staff supporting overall position counts within our agencies. We have no uniformity at all. We're kind of all over the place in our decentralized model. And that's something certainly we're looking at, trying to ensure that each of the state agencies has the kind of IT support that they need, but that it's rationalized. There's some reason or compelling rationale as to how many IT staff we have to support a certain number of employees or a certain number of systems within our agencies. This gives you an idea, and again, I won't go into the detail, but gives you an idea of how our staff count in our decentralized model has grown over the years. A decade or more ago, we had 1,768 positions. We've grown in this decentralized model of about 500 or 600 positions in a 15 plus year period of time. From a spending perspective, again, this gives you the detail by category of that $2.3 billion of IT spend that we estimate in our current biennium, the 2023. Again, we estimate this is about 1.8% of the all funds budget for that same biennium. Importantly, and this is one piece of advice, certainly if Vermont hasn't yet gotten a handle on this, in our model here in Oregon, and throughout my entire tenure here, 27 years, it's been incredibly difficult from the central office, either in the executive branch or in the legislature, to utilize our source systems, our big enterprise resource planning finance system, our budget system, our personnel systems, to pull accurate information out about what we're spending and how many staff we have. So if you aren't yet in a position where you have confidence in your number about how much you're spending in what area, or where your staff are housed in the various agencies, how they're supporting the various agencies, that's an area of focus. Just making sure you have a tended garden from a data perspective, so you can make more informed decisions. As an example, here in Oregon, about 15, almost 20 years ago, we didn't have an ability to tell in the IT expendable property category, which is category number 4 here on the screen, whether we were buying a computer, a server, or a chair or a desk. And so we worked with our agencies, with our budget professionals in the central office to allow agencies to budget for IT and non-IT expendable property, as an example. We had the same conversation where professional services are concerned. We had no ability to split out in our financial system, in our budgeting system, whether we were hiring just a general business consultant or whether we were hiring Deloitte or Accenture or one of the big IT consulting firms on one of our big projects. So we were able to split that kind of chart of accounts information out, so we had better information on how we were spending. But even today, we're not able to, at a granular level, tell anyone other than through a direct agency survey how much we're spending on cybersecurity, as an example, which is very important, becoming more important for our budgets.
So, Mr. McSpadden, just a question. So this isn't a centralized section of your state budget. It's just that in the chart of accounts, you have it coded. That's probably not the right word, but it's coded at this point so that you can go through and pull this report across all agencies and departments and stuff?
Yes, Chair.
Okay.
Absolutely. We do not have a dedicated IT budget or section for an IT budget in our legislatively adopted budget. So yes, we're just pulling this information from the source systems. And, as you might imagine, it's garbage in, garbage out. If it's not coded properly, we don't, it's lost, right? And so there's some hidden spends, certainly, here in our state budget and our ability to account for how our expenditures through our finance system. The last point I'd make here, I have some line items at the bottom, the executive branch IT position category that are in italics. In our budgeting system, we do not budget for IT and non-IT related positions. And so we're having to calculate this amount, divine the number. So this really is an estimate on what we spend on internal IT staff positions in the executive branch. So again, if you all are far out ahead, if you have a dedicated IT budget, if you're able to, at a granular level, understand the different categories, the different levels of IT spend, you're far out ahead of Oregon, as an example.
No.
Okay. Would you like me to continue?
Yes, please.
You bet. So here again, I won't go into any detail, but I know you've been talking about your agency for digital services. I wanted to give you the operating budget for the state chief information officer in Oregon. The name was changed a few years ago to the Office of Enterprise Information Services. This is their operating budget by category. Again, they have a far more granular level of detail than we have in our source systems, but wanted to give you this for a comparison to let you know what they're spending their money on in the current biennium. Also, this revenue source piece, I think, is important to the conversation. I went back to that slide. Again, we use an assessment for those statewide services that are very difficult to determine, the demand or utilization of a specific service. So the vast majority of the state CIO's office is funded through assessment, but where our data center is concerned and where some of our shared services are concerned, there is a charge for service, a utilization-based or demand-based what's a charge to the agencies. And we go through a very similar process in budget development that your joint fiscal office described earlier today, where the agencies get together with the Office of Enterprise Information Services, with the Department of Administrative Services Chief Financial Office, and with some other committees to identify, the expected utilization of the data center, as an example, both from a computing perspective, a storage perspective, a network perspective, and a sundry number of other services to project ahead. And then at some point there has to be a true up with actuals. So again, that's a charge for service for some of those categories. This just gives you a view of those 7 primary categories of spend that we're able to pull from our source systems. Again, I won't go into any level of detail, but I wanted to give you an idea of the growth of spending over that period of time. I think we've maintained somewhere between a 1.5% and 2.2% or so of the all funds budget metric. As our overall budget has expanded, our spend on IT from a pure dollar perspective has increased. But in any case, this just gives you that decade-long longitudinal data on growth of spending here in Oregon in those primary categories. And again, I have some notes at the bottom that talk about what's not in the graphic, but also highlights again the fact that we estimate 75 to 80% of the expenditures are focused on legacy systems, limited funding available for innovation and modernization. And also, I heard earlier a question from one of the members of your committee about your spending there in Vermont. Federal funds versus the general fund. We do estimate that, we know by category that the spending in these 7 primary chart of account areas, about 78% of the budgeted IT expenditures are what we call other funds and federal funds. There's a much smaller amount that comes from the general fund. A lot of times the general fund expenditures are really meant to serve as a match for the federal grant program or for federal funding when there's a mix of funding from our federal partners, so on and so forth. So very similar to what's happening in Vermont. Here, wanted to give both your committee and also your Joint Oversight Committee an idea of the kind of direction that the legislature and the executive branch through the State Chief Information Officer provides to agencies in all 3 branches. Certainly, there's an expectation that that plans are developed, projecting forward the goals, objectives, and priority projects that the agencies have moving forward. We try to get the agencies to reveal the specific projects they're proposing. We use a term called policy option package. I'll describe that a little bit more later in the presentation, but basically agencies are required in Oregon to call out explicitly from their base budget or their current service level budget, as we call it, those projects that require new money, new positions, or new spending authority. And so that allows the legislature to focus in on those newly proposed projects, allows overseers like our office and the state CIO to more closely scrutinize the business case for those projects, the alternatives analysis and planning that's been done so far to assess whether they're ready to move forward from planning to implementation, or whether the better course for the legislature would be to provide, some more limited resources for them to improve the chances of success, allow them to complete planning before the legislature is kind of forced to, allocate scarce general fund or bond capacity to a project that isn't ready to move to implementation yet. And so we do have, again, a variety of other requirements. These blue items that are underlined are all hyperlinked within the presentation that I provided to your committee assistant. So certainly some of this more detailed information on agency strategic plans, on some of the statutory guidance that Oregon has for our agencies is available for viewing later. Wanted to give you a graphical view. Again, I won't go into any level of detail here, but I heard earlier that you all also have a very long tail on your biennial budgeting process. Here in Oregon, again, we have 2 sessions, one in the odd numbered year, one in the even numbered year, but we are a biennial budget state. And so from a project perspective, the purpose of this graphic is just to show that it's a long process. It's 15 months from start to finish. And to expect that an agency would be able to accurately estimate, project scope, project schedule, project budget, very early on, in that 15-month cycle, because as you all know, we have agencies that are proposing, in their agency request budget, that's our terminology here in Oregon, to the governor's office. Hey, here's what we want to do in the next biennium. The governor's office, the policy advisors, the chief financial office then vet that information. They develop the governor's budget. Again, there's a lot of wait time there, several months that pass. And then the governor's budget is kind of thrown over the wall to the legislature, and we spend 6+ months vetting the budget and ultimately ending up with a legislatively adopted budget. And that's that biennial boundary line in the middle. And so, a lot of time has passed since the original business case, the original estimation of project schedule, scope and budget. And so we believe that a more gated approach is more appropriate in this situation, in particular with the very largest projects. And so we do try to take that approach with oversight, also with funding. And we've done that for the last decade or so, and it certainly hasn't produced perfect results because IT projects are complex and risky, but I think a better approach overall. And then of course we've got this 24-month biennial, what we call biennium of execution. Again, because it took so long to actually get the budget approval, often will require agencies to do a reset to reconcile their business case, their project plans with reality. Now that so much time has passed, we really all kind of roll up our sleeves and get busy on those things that have moved from a concept or an idea to something that's real, something that the agency is now expected to implement. So I just wanted to mention, as part of the biennial budget process, the executive branch agencies are required to work with the state CIO's office on an IT project prioritization within their individual agencies. Ultimately, that's rolled up to the program level and then discussed with the policy advisors within the governor's office. It's a process that was put in place in, I believe, 2019 here in Oregon. It has some pros and cons, but certainly requires a more focused look at the agency level about, in particular, the largest agencies. If they have, 8, 9, 10, 20 project proposals internally, it requires them to do more planning up front to prioritize within their agencies about what actually could get done. At a central level, at an executive level within the agency prior to coming over to the state CIO's office and the governor's office for that governor's budget development. Obviously, you all were talking earlier about some of your largest projects, how difficult it is to fund those projects. We didn't delve into the characteristics of how you define a large project, but here in Oregon, generally speaking, large projects or major IT projects we defined as any projects that exceed $1 million that span multiple years. Certainly, sometimes these projects, if they're large enough, if they involve enough constituents, the projects can be multiple biennia in nature. Certainly, the bonded projects fit into that category. They're mission critical, they're inherently risky and complex. And again, as I indicated, because of that long lead time of developing the budget requests, we often have to have a reassessment, a reconciliation of the project plans, the business case, the market research, because so much time has passed. We believe these projects are best overseen in a gated approach, and I'll show graphically here in a moment the approach that Oregon takes. We have a process that was put in place in 2014 called the stage gate review process. Importantly, it's a shared process. It's a joint process between our state CIO's office and our office, the Legislative Fiscal Office. When I was the deputy state CIO for Oregon, from 2008 to 2013, the legislature had a person in the position that I hold now. We worked well together, but frankly, we had different processes. We interacted with the agencies differently. We had different criteria that we held the agencies to in regard to their demonstration of whether the projects were ready to move from planning to execution. What a good business case looked like, et cetera. And so in 2014, when I came over to the legislature, the state CIO, our office, we got together and developed this joint process to avoid giving the agencies whiplash between executive branch and legislative branch scrutiny. And so I think it's been a good process for certainly for our offices from an oversight perspective across the branches, but I think from the agency perspective, certainly if they're new to it, it can seem onerous. It can produce delays, but sometimes those delays produce better planning and ultimately better project implementation, because we spent the time to do the right things, to focus in on the right things on these very large and complex and risky projects. Just wanted to give you a view just topically of the kinds of projects that have been proposed both in the current biennium and in the 2025-27 biennium. By count, right now, our office, State CIO's office, we are jointly overseeing 71 major IT projects that exceed $1 million. The total estimated project budget for those projects exceeds $1.2 billion on a biennial basis. For this upcoming biennium, we have 38 projects that have submitted policy option packages. Again, believe they have a need for new money, for new positions and new spending authority. Also, from time to time, we have these biennial, these projects that span multiple biennia, and we have the need to cost shift from one biennia to another, or shift spending authority from one, or bonding authority from one biennium to another because of project delays of some kind or another. Here I have a couple of slides. I definitely want to leave some time for conversation, for questions. These are the definitions are meant to be leave behind, so I'm going to move through these slides fairly quickly, but wanted to give you an idea of how we fund here in Oregon enterprise or shared IT service programs and projects. The next couple of slides will focus in on the agencies themselves as well. But of course, the methods, I'll just hit on the bolded portions of the slides. These programs and projects are funded through direct legislative appropriation, through something we call a special purpose appropriation, which could be a general fund appropriation or a set aside for our interim emergency board for a specific purpose. We also have a price list of goods and services. This is that demand-based chargeback, an assessment that Oregon has available to it. Certainly it's used quite widely by a variety of different central service agencies, including the Office of Enterprise Information Services. Again, I've provided a link here to our most recent price list. Certainly the agencies and the Office of the State CIO does pursue a variety of different projects through their base or current service level budget, which doesn't receive anywhere near the same kind of scrutiny that our new requests, our policy option packages might have applied to them. Grant funding and fees, certainly our small boards and commissions. Oregon, again, we're very decentralized from an IT perspective, but also from a functional perspective. Oregon has 71 agency boards and commissions that are involved in licensing and permitting, as an example. Nearly all of those organizations charge a fee to either the establishment or the individual licensee that they oversee. And quite often they'll come forward requesting a fee increase to fund a new licensing system, a case management system, an investigations system.
Mr. McSpadden, can I ask you a little bit more about the fee approach?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, if a particular department or agency needs to upgrade, like you mentioned, say the cost of a licensing program, would they simply bring forward some sort of adjusted or increased fee within their own individual budget request? Or does the Oregon State Legislature typically consider and move just a standard or routine fee bill across all state agencies? That's something that Vermont used to do and doesn't do anymore.
Chair James, thank you for the question. Yes, we do have a standard fee bill, but we also, where increases are concerned, in particular, increases beyond a certain percentage, the licensing board or commission is required to, within their budget bill, their individual budget bill, to reveal and request legislative approval for the fee increase. Of course, from a stakeholder management perspective, there's an expectation that they've already gotten approval for that request from their board, and that they've communicated, prior to the governor's budget with their stakeholders. But yes, there's two different approaches, again, for maintaining current fee structures, potentially for using existing fees for different purposes. There is that standard fee bill, but if we have a substantive increase in a fee, the agencies are expected to come forward to explicitly call that out, and as the source of funding for their new either on-premise or now these cloud-based software as a service solutions.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. We also may have the same kind of situation. I'd have to get back to you on this, where the funding approach that's envisioned is a self-funded approach, where the vendor who provides the system recoups their cost through some kind of convenience fee or transaction fee on the application or the renewal request. That's another approach that Oregon has taken in the past.
Okay.
So very quickly, this policy option package, again, I've got the detail here for you all to read later, but it is required of agencies for any endeavor, any project that calls for new money, new spending authority, or new positions. And so this is, again, for the current biennium, we have 38 of them. We're reviewing them now with our budget analysts, formulating our recommendations for the joint Ways and Means members to consider. We also use bonding. Certainly there are some states, Massachusetts is the preeminent example of this. They've had a bonding program, I think, for the last 20 plus years. I think in this most current biennium, they had a bond of about $1.3 billion to fund all IT modernization activities within Massachusetts. And so Oregon does have a bonding program. We used to use a mechanism called certificates of participation. Now we utilize Article 11Q bonds. I did check the last couple of biennia. There's been limited use of the bonding program by maybe a half a dozen or fewer Oregon state agencies, certainly for the largest projects, those that can be capitalized. The advent of cloud services, software as a service, does kind of complicate the use of these kinds of bonds. There are some components of a cloud-based system or project that envisions implementing a software as a service solution. There's some components that are uniform with an on-premise system project. But there are some components of these cloud-based projects that are not bondable. Certainly, the software as a service subscriptions that occur after implementation, those are operational costs, of course, but there's some puts and takes, some pros and cons, depending on the approach the agency wants to take. But again, bonds have been used pretty regularly over the last, half a dozen years to a decade.
Okay, we have a question from Representative Campbell.
Yes, I'm so excited. Wondering about bonding, whether bonding for IT is a distinct type of bond as opposed to bonding for I don't know, for bricks and mortar infrastructure. It seems like the life of the bond or the term of the bond would be a lot less.
Representative Campbell, that's a great question. Certainly, the expected life is a shorter period of time, but no, we use the same type of bond. I do have a slide, I think, coming up next. Yes, here that talks in more detail about the allowable costs and the unallowable costs for bonding, specific to IT projects. I believe, if memory serves, the expected life has to be at least 6 years. Many of these systems, of course, we've maintained over time, are 20, 30, 40 years old. We currently have a state finance system that is a mainframe COBOL system that Oregon transferred from Michigan in the mid-90s. We have a similar finance system, of course, in our Department of Transportation that was implemented a decade earlier in the mid-80s. So the traditional systems, of course, have a much longer lifespan than we ever estimated. Certainly, I heard the discussion earlier about one of the benefits of cloud-based solutions is that you're able to keep them longer because the vendor maintains them and supports them and regularly publishes or distributes updates to the functionality of the system. Theoretically, you're always current as long as you don't customize those solutions. So it is a conversation that occurs between our capital finance group on the executive branch side, our legislative fiscal office analyst who manages our capital construction committee and the agencies, this lifespan question, but also I think for the most part, they drill down to these allowable and unallowable costs. And for the unallowable costs, how are they going to fund it? And it really depends on the agency and their primary source of funding for their normal operations.
I can imagine a bonding mechanism where the vendor would agree to a billing over the life of, in effect, over the life of the bond, so that the annual cost would be a portion of the upfront cost of creating the upgrade, the software upgrade with the new IT system in the first place, something like that, so that so it would be a way, in other words, a way of spreading out the large upfront cost of setting up a new system over the life of the bond.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, great question, great thinking in regard to how these costs can be normalized over the lifespan of the system and or the lifespan of the bond itself. There are some instances where long-term leases are able to be capitalized as well. Of course, they've got to align with the GASB accounting rules and standards, but some of these nuances are, to get to the root of them are really the primary cause of sometimes extended conversations between our capital finance folks. And the agencies, of course, are waiting with bated breath for those decisions. So it's again, this is the standard list of what can and can't be bonded, but there are some nuances that the agencies discuss from time to time. And certainly our vendors are coming up with more and more innovative solutions on how these kinds of projects can be funded.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. I'm getting to the end of my prepared slides. I know this was a conversation that you had earlier today. We've been working for the last couple of months with a number of states, and in particular with our colleagues, Doug Robinson and others from the National Association of State CIOs, to try to compile a list of states that in the past or currently or proposed in the current biennium are considering these kinds of Technology Innovation and Modernization Fund. So far, we've come up with a list of 27 states, including Oregon. And I'll talk here in a moment about Oregon's effort. But over the last 30 years, a lot of states have tried it. Some of these funds have been sustained over time. Certainly Massachusetts in one form or another, likely there have been statutory changes to the bond funding approach that they've taken. But again, I've been around a long time, 27 years. I remember reading and talking with folks from Massachusetts in the early 2000s about their effort. But some other states like Oregon, we've had fits and starts. And we had a fund in the early 90s, actually was established. Our Productivity Improvement Fund was established in 1989, but by the mid 90s had gone dormant. In fact, I tried to check for detail on that program and on the fund that underpinned it. And in the mid 90s, when we implemented our current financial system, it had already gone dormant and no information was loaded into our financial system at that time. So if I have a request out to our state archives to find out, what amount of money was actually put into the fund and what monies were withdrawn, over that short 5-6 year period. So some states are like Oregon. We tried it; it didn't work or couldn't be sustained. And other states have a multi-decade long history of these kinds of innovation funds. So definitely on this issue, would love to continue to work with your committee, with your joint fiscal office, to try to suss out additional detail on the nuances of some of these funds that have been established over time or that are being proposed in the current biennium. Oregon does have a bill, Senate Bill 90, that we're considering in the current legislative session. We actually have as I mentioned, a public hearing on this particular bill this Friday. So this gives you a little more detail, gives you the statutory reference for future review of federal improvement fund established in 1989. Chapter 182. There's more information about our Senate Bill 90, the bill that's being considered in the current legislative session. Provided the links to our April 4th meeting and all the materials we posted so far. And then that concludes my prepared remarks. The remaining slides are some resource slides that provide links and URLs to source material on how we require agencies to plan for, budget for, and how we oversee IP programs and projects here in Oregon. So I'd be glad to take any questions that you and the members might have.
Thank you for putting so much time into your presentation. That was really, really interesting to see how things work in Oregon. Did you have a chance at all to, based on the fact that you watched our hearing this morning, which I really appreciate as well, any thoughts or comments about where Vermont stands in the Great Continuum and where you see opportunities for us? Or
Chair James, great question. Unfortunately, your joint fiscal office staff was exactly right in stating we're all in the same situation, right? While I think over the last biennium or two, many of the states have enjoyed a dramatic increase in federal funding, which has been applied to purpose for certainly in the IT area. The approach of trying to quickly take advantage of those federal funds, whether they be grant funds or enhanced federal funds participation for some of our federally funded agencies to quickly update and modernize these systems. But we're all now faced with the potential for clawback of federal funds or discontinuation, lack of reauthorization of federal funding programs. And so it's not a pretty picture when we think about, will the state in our current biennium, state of Oregon in our current biennium be able to carve out $10 million, $100 million, either of bonding capacity or of general fund appropriation for tech modernization. So we've got a tremendous backlog of old systems that really do need to be modernized or replaced. And unfortunately, for Oregon, we're still in that kind of one agency at a time, making a proposal, having it vetted in an individual budget hearing. And then from the macro perspective, the Joint Committee on Ways and Means having to make some very, very hard choices about what gets funded and what doesn't, again, on an individual basis. I think certainly you do have an advantage in that you already have this special fund established. I think you also, from my perspective, again, I have a friend that uses the expression, it's my opinion, I'm the expert on my opinion. 27 years operating in a decentralized environment. I know the grass isn't always greener in states that I've looked at that have a more centralized or unified structure. It does seem that you're not fighting that operational battle for money like a decentralized state really is. You're more able to in your state, again, outside looking in, if you have a priority project in one agency or another, you're able to redirect the centralized resources that are in the Agency for Digital Services to that purpose. You're able to move or make more fungible these scarce IT resources. In a decentralized environment, the agency has control of the money, the positions, and has responsibility for project implementation. So we end up in a situation where we have an agency that has an old system that the current leadership team inherited. It's 20, 30 years old. They've never implemented or planned for a major IT project of this kind. And now they're requesting the ability, strangely, to do it for the first time in their lives and probably the only time in their lives. And so it's because we aren't able to easily move resources or money from one agency to another. We have these reinforced silos, and those barriers are very, very difficult to break down, in particular because of the color of money. Not every agency is funded by the general fund, which is the best color of money that could be moved, from one part of government to another, or bonds. We have this individual competition on bonding. So, hopefully I'm sort of answering the question. You have some advantages, I think, because of your structure.
Yeah.
Because you have set up this special fund, but you have the same challenges that probably every other state in the country has in regard to how do we seed that fund and how do we sustain it over time. I heard earlier one of your committee members talking about, couldn't we just have a recurring appropriation, 10 million every year or 10 million every biennium, using our approach? Absolutely. I would bet your Agency for Digital Services folks would love that kind of approach. In Oregon and in other states, you'll see from time to time the funds being set up in statute where they're a share in savings type of approach, where it's a savings estimate, modernization initiative, funding is allocated. Then there's a requirement for reporting and for benefits tracking. And then if savings are realized, then by concept, the agency would be able to keep some of the money and the rest of it would be returned to the fund. In other states, if there's any savings realized from money that came from the fund, all of the money goes back to the fund. And even if that's what the law says, often in dire budgetary times, the legislature, as you know, will be forced to sweep that money, if the need arises. And even though the statute says this is a dedicated fund separate from the general fund, those monies do get swept from time to time if the need arises.
Rep. Clapner?
So Sean, I also just want to say thank you very much for all the time you took putting all this together, and also the time you took familiarizing yourself with what we do so that you can give us the context and comparison. I really appreciate that. And I apologize. I have a call that I'm now 6 minutes late for if I have to run, but did want to say thank you and apologize for having to chat.
No worries at all. I have forgotten that you're 3 hours ahead. It's only 9:06 here.
We're hungry.
Yeah. Well, I think unless we have further questions, that,
Thank you.
like I said, that was very helpful. You obviously put so much time in your presentation and you may be hearing from us again.
I hope so. Again, it was a genuine call out. I think your joint fiscal office has done some great work and would love to collaborate with them. And also because we have, we have our joint committee on information management technology. I know your committee's focused on this issue. So is your joint IT oversight committee. We'd be glad to work with you and or put you in contact with our members, our co-chairs, if that would be helpful to you all.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thank
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. All right, folks, we are adjourned and we are back at 2:30.